Ethan sat motionless at his desk, the hum of pencils scratching paper all around him. The classroom was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of feet or the soft sigh of frustration from a struggling student. The math test in front of Ethan looked like it was written in another language. Numbers blurred and danced before his tired eyes. His fingers trembled as he picked up his pencil, not to solve a problem, but to send a message he could barely admit. He needed to write. Asterisk. He wasn't like the other kids freshly dressed, chatting in the hallways, laughing at lunch. Ethan came to school with shadows under his eyes and shoes that didn't quite fit. He often sat alone, too quiet to be noticed, too troubled to be understood. Teachers marked him as shy, maybe slow, but none had looked close enough to see what he was hiding. Asterisk today, as Ms. Carter paced between the rows, checking on each student, Ethan's breath caught in his chest. He stared down at the blank space. At the top of his paper, his mind screamed louder than ever. He couldn't solve the equations. He couldn't pretend anymore. He needed anyone to see him. Asterisk slowly, carefully, he pressed his pencil to the paper and wrote the words, "Help me," just above question 1. His hand shook as he slid the paper forward. Then he folded his arms and laid his head down, trying to hide the fear rising in his throat. Asterisk Ms. Carter stopped near his desk. She was the type of teacher who noticed everything, who always said, "Are you okay?" even when no one answered. She gently picked up Ethan's paper and continued on, but something in her expression shifted when she read those 2 words. It was brief, a flicker of concern, a pause in her walk, but it was enough. Enough to show that Ethan's message hadn't been ignored. Enough to spark a ripple that would soon become a wave of change. Asterisk that small cry, written on a test sheet, wasn't just a plea, it was a turning point. It was the moment a boy who had been invisible became visible. The moment his silence was broken, not with noise, but with understanding. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than fear. He felt seen, and sometimes, that's where healing begins, with someone simply seeing the pain you're too scared to speak. Asterisk the classroom was still and silent, the echoes of the day slowly fading as the sun dipped behind the school building. Papers were scattered across Ms. Carter's desk. A half-empty coffee cup sat forgotten beside her, and the overhead lights cast a warm, tired glow on the stacks of test sheets waiting to be graded. She rubbed her temples, exhausted but determined to finish what she had started. She prided herself on being thorough, not just with answers, but with her students. Asterisk she reached for the next paper in the pile and saw Ethan's name scribbled in the corner. Ms. Carter paused for a moment. Ethan, the boy who rarely spoke, who always turned in his work late, who looked as though he carried the weight of something far heavier than his backpack. Asterisk as her eyes moved down the page. Her breath caught, there at the top before any answers, before even an attempt, were the words, "Help me," written not in anger or sarcasm, but in small, uneven letters that trembled on the page. Asterisk she stared at them, her pulse quickening. At first, she blinked, wondering if she was imagining things, misreading a phrase in the blur of numbers and equations. But no, it was real. Her heart sank. She could almost hear the silence in Ethan's mind when he wrote those words. They weren't just a comment. They were a cry. Asterisk Ms. Carter sat back in her chair, the paper still in her hands. She had seen students act out, fake sick, or even cheat to get out of tests. But this wasn't one of those moments. This wasn't about schoolwork. This was about survival. And for a student to ask for help in the only place he felt safe in, a math test, meant things had gone far beyond academic trouble. Asterisk without hesitation, she placed the test down, closed her gradebook, and walked across the room to lock the classroom door behind her. The faint sound of the lock clicking echoed with finality. She didn't second-guess what she had to do. Asterisk she reached into her drawer for the contact sheet, fingers trembling slightly as she picked up her phone. It wasn't just about following protocol anymore. This was personal. A child had reached out, not with words spoken, but with a quiet, desperate message only she had seen, and she was going to answer it. The apartment building stood like a forgotten shell at the edge of the city, its walls cracked, its hallways dim and heavy with silence. Faint flickers of light came from a few windows, but most were dark, lifeless. It was late evening when Ms. Carter stepped out of the car, joined by the school counselor and a social worker. She clutched Ethan's school file tightly, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. Asterisk they climbed the narrow staircase, the walls stained and chipped, the air thick with a musty scent that hinted at years of neglect. Each step echoed louder than the last, building a tension none of them dared voice aloud. When they reached apartment 3B, the counselor gave a gentle knock. No answer. Another knock, still silence. Asterisk then, just as the social worker reached for the doorbell, it creaked open slowly. There stood Ethan. His frame looked even smaller in the shadowy doorway, eyes wide with confusion and fear. He wore the same wrinkled hoodie from school, his hair unbrushed, his face pale. Behind him, the apartment was almost empty, just a battered couch, a mattress on the floor, and a flickering stove burner. Asterisk on the stovetop sat a small, dented pot with a can of beans barely warming. Ethan clutched a spoon, unsure of whether to speak or run, but when his eyes met Miss Carter's, something inside him seemed to stop. Asterisk, you came, he whispered, more to himself than to them. Asterisk, Miss Carter stepped inside gently, her voice soft and steady. We just want to make sure you're okay, Ethan. Asterisk, he hesitated, then nodded, lowering the spoon. The counselor scanned the room. No sign of an adult, no warmth, just an overwhelming sense of loneliness and survival. The social worker asked a few quiet questions, but it was clear Ethan had been alone for days. His mother, battling addiction, hadn't come home. The cupboards were nearly empty. The apartment was freezing. Asterisk, Ms. Carter blinked back tears as she took it all in. She couldn't believe a child had been living like this right under her watch, coming to class every day with this weight on his shoulders, and yet he had still found the courage to write, "Help me," asterisk, in that dim, forgotten apartment. The truth emerged raw, heartbreaking, and undeniable, and for Ethan, that knock on the door meant something he hadn't felt in a long time. Asterisk. He wasn't alone anymore. Asterisk. The room was small but filled with warmth, a soft bed tucked against the wall, shelves lined with colorful books, a window cracked open to let in the scent of evening rain. Ethan sat quietly beneath a thick blanket, his hair damp from a real shower, his hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa that steamed gently in the dim light. It had been only a few days since he left the apartment, but to him, it felt like a different lifetime. Asterisk. The foster home was quiet, so different from the chaos he had grown used to. No loud arguments, no cold floors, no empty cabinets, just peace. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan had slept through the night, without fear, no waiting for a door to slam, no waiting for someone to come home who never did. Asterisk. When Ms. Carter arrived that afternoon, he didn't run or hide, he smiled. Asterisk. She entered with a small tote bag filled with puzzles, books, and a brand new journal. I thought you might need something to keep your thoughts, he said with a soft smile. Asterisk. Ethan reached over to his nightstand and picked up a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, as though he had held it many times before giving it away. Silently, he handed it to her. Asterisk. Ms. Carter opened it and read the simple message, written in blocky, careful letters. Asterisk. Thank you for seeing me. Asterisk. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She knelt beside his bed, placing a hand gently on his. You matter, Ethan. You always have. I'm just sorry it took this long for someone to listen. Asterisk. Ethan didn't say much. He didn't need to. The note said everything. Asterisk. That small piece of paper, so different from the first one he had written on his math test, wasn't a cry for help. It was gratitude, a fragile spark of hope, ignited by someone who chose to see past the silence, past the worn clothes and lowered gaze, and reach into the shadows he had been living in. Asterisk. And as Ms. Carter tucked the note into her bag like it was something precious, Ethan leaned back against the pillow, his heart a little lighter. For the first time in his young life, he wasn't surviving. He was starting to feel safe, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Asterisk. The classroom buzzed with energy as sunlight poured through the windows, casting a golden glow across the desks. Students leaned over their books, exchanging answers, whispering jokes, and raising their hands with the kind of eager confidence that comes from feeling safe and seen. And there, in the middle of it all, sat Ethan. Asterisk. No longer hunched over or hiding behind his hair. Ethan now sat upright, his eyes bright with focus. His clothes were clean, his smile easy. When Ms. Carter posed a challenging math problem to the class, a dozen hands shot up, but it was Ethan's that caught her eye. Asterisk. With a small nod from her, he stood and walked to the board. In steady strokes, he worked through the problem. Number 2. Hesitation, no fear, just quiet strength and a newfound belief in himself. When he finished, the room burst into soft applause, and Ethan turned back, a shy but proud smile tugging at his lips. Asterisk. Ms. Carter didn't clap. She didn't need to. Her heart was already full. Asterisk. After class, she walked to her office, her steps, slow, reflective. On the wall above her desk, in a simple wooden frame, hung the test paper that had changed everything. The faded words still stood out, written in small, pleading letters across the top. Asterisk, help me. Asterisk, she looked at it every day not as a reminder of sadness, but as a symbol of what one small moment of courage could do, and what one act of attention could mean. That note had saved a life not because it was loud, but because it had been heard. Asterisk, outside the window, children spilled into the playground, laughter echoing through the halls. Ethan was among them, now not invisible, not alone. He was part of the world again, growing, thriving, dreaming. Asterisk, Miss Carter smiled to herself as she returned to her desk. She had taught many lessons in her life, but none more powerful than this. Sometimes, the most important test isn't the one we grade, it's the one we notice. And when we choose to see, to truly see, the quiet cries between the lines, we can change a life forever. Asterisk, Ethan's journey wasn't over, but it was brighter. And that small paper on her wall would always remind her and anyone who stepped into that room that even the softest voices deserve to be heard. Asterisk,